Sony has announced a God of War Trilogy remake, but the problem is the term remake can mean a lot of things. For example, this could be a Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy style remake, which included updated versions of all 3 original Crash Bandicoot games in a single package, completely rebuilt from the ground up in a new engine, but designed to mimic the originals as closely as possible. There were some subtle changes in the physics and controls. Hardcore fans will definitely notice some differences in the way the games feel, but for the casual audience, these remakes might as well be identical to their originals. With new visuals, some new features like time trials, a new playable character, and a much appreciated autosave. If you ever played the original Crash Bandicoot, you will know that it had one of the most insane save functions in any video game ever. You could only ever save your game if you grabbed 3 hidden collectibles in a level and then completed a bonus challenge zone, which were often quite difficult, and you only got 1 try. It was very frustrating. But whatever, my point is the Crash Bandicoot Remake Trilogy could be a very good model for the God of War remakes to follow. From a purely gameplay perspective, God of War 2 and 3 are basically perfect. They have aged extremely well. I don't think you would need to change almost anything. I don't know, Typhon's Cavern and 2 always seemed kind of dull to me. Maybe you could spice it up a bit. And these flying sections are a bit chunky, and I always hated this Phoenix puzzle. But otherwise, just give us some modern graphics and I think we are good to go. However, the first game is a different story. Now, to be clear, I love the first God of War. Pandora's Temple is one of my all-time favorite levels in any video game ever. A sprawling, interconnected dungeon filled with traps and puzzles and monsters, and all of it, the whole ancient complex being carried on the back of a titan wandering through the wasteland. It is awesome. It is so cool. The God of War series never really did another classic adventure dungeon at this same scale, at least not as interconnected as Pandora's Temple was. And to be fair, most of the puzzles and platforming here have aged pretty well, but some of them have not. Some parts of this game kind of totally suck. The most infamously frustrating challenge is probably these giant spinning pillars in Hades near the end of the game. These things freaking blow turds. You gotta climb to the top while avoiding these moving spikes, and that might not sound too difficult. But if Kratos' little toe so much as glances at one of those spikes, your dumb, stupid ass is immediately going straight down to the bottom. See you later, loser. Try doing it 50 more times. Or there was this puzzle which drove me insane as a kid. Kratos has to push this block through a little maze, which would be fine except there is a timer, and when it runs out, spikes shoot out of the floor which instantly kill you. And because Kratos is the slowest goddamn block pusher on the planet, I mean my grandmother could push this block faster than him, and she's dead by the way. Her freaking corpse could move faster than this guy. So you've got to take advantage of Kratos' famous block kicking move, which is also frustrating because it's not very consistent. And if you make a single mistake, if you kick the block an inch too far or an inch too short, you might as well just lay down on the floor and die, because the timer here is very aggressive, and even if you do it completely perfect, you're still barely going to have enough time to escape. The boss fights in the original game are pretty weak as well. There are only 3 of them, and actually the Hydra is fine, it's still pretty fun. But while I remember thinking the Minotaur was really cool when I was a kid, returning to it now it's pretty repetitive and clunky. And I never liked Ares' final phase, where it takes away your chain blades and forces you to use this piece of crap sword instead. My point is, there's a lot of bullshit in that first game. I think it needs a lot more work than went into something like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy to really shine. Of course, the term remake could conceivably also mean something like the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, which changes the gameplay and story so much and adds so much new content that it's nearly unrecognizable. I believe this is very unlikely, but it's fun to think about what a totally new version of, say, God of War 3 might look like, with all of the missing Greek gods of the Pantheon included this time around. Like, imagine whole new boss fights with Apollo, Artemis, Dionysus, none of whom appeared in the original game, which was always disappointing. Or we could get something like the Silent Hill 2 remake, which kept the story mostly the same, but changed from fixed static camera angles to a third person behind the shoulder camera, which I also believe is unlikely. The fixed camera is very much a part of Greek God of War's DNA. It gave the original games a much more cinematic and grand feel that was lost in the Norse entries, and it allowed the combat to be much more chaotic and frenetic. Not to mention most of the platforming sequences here really only work with a fixed camera. You'd have to completely redesign all of these. Platforming is something else the series lost in the transition to the Norse setting. The movement in the Greek games is actually really fluid and fast-paced when it works. But with all of that said, something I do really like about the modern over-the-shoulder camera is that it gives you a much more intimate view of the environment. You can really get in close and appreciate all of those little details, really immerse yourself in the setting. I just love Pandora's Temple and the Island of Time so much that it would be a dream come true for me to be able to see them from a whole new perspective, to look at them from Kratos' point of view. But again, I believe that is unlikely. If you change the camera, you'd have to change literally everything, which is likely outside of the scope of this remake. My dream is that the God of War Remake trilogy will follow the example of the Dead Space remake, which kept 90% of the gameplay the same with a few tasteful updates. For example, in the original Dead Space, the zero-gravity sections were extremely clunky and slow. The remake transformed this into something much better by giving the player full three-dimensional movement in zero gravity, so the player can freely navigate the space. It was a massive improvement. I would love to see the clunkier sections of God of War 1 reimagined in similar ways. The Dead Space remake also kept the game's story 90% the same, but again made some really smart changes. The original Dead Space trilogy was a story in progress. You know, over the years from entry to entry, things change. There were some plot holes and retcons and things that didn't quite make sense once it was all over. It happens with every series. The remake did a really good job of smoothing over some of those rough edges, filling in some plot holes. The Greek God of War trilogy could really use some similar treatment. For example, Athena's motivations are notoriously inconsistent across all three games. At the end of the second game, she sacrifices her life to save Zeus. And then at the very beginning of the third game, which only takes place like 5 minutes later by the way, she does a total 180. She completely changes her mind and is like, hell yeah, Kratos, kill 'em all man, Zeus deserves to die and I'm gonna help. This is something we could work on in a remake. Let's make her character's goals be a little more consistent. You know, what does she actually want? Gaia is another example. In the second game, she is a master manipulator on par with Odin in Ragnarok. Very intelligent, very subtly manipulating Kratos into doing what she wants. She's one of my favorite characters in the whole series. Unfortunately, between games, she got hit in the head with a stupid stick, because at the beginning of the third game, for no real reason at all, she just gives the whole thing away, abandoning all attempts at manipulation and revealing to Kratos that she was just using him all along, making herself his enemy for no purpose. As we see with Odin in Ragnarok, a really good manipulator never tells the truth unless it gives them some form of advantage, or to cover up some even more dangerous deceit. I would love to see Gaia maintain her intelligence in the third game. Instead, the writers could give Kratos the opportunity to see through her lies on his own, the same way he does with Odin. I mean, Kratos is a smart guy. He should be able to figure this out without her just spoiling everything. And I know not all fans are going to agree with me here, but I thought the Dead Space remake also did a really good job at expanding the roles of certain characters. For example, Isaac's crewmates Kendra and Hammond were a bit one-note in the original, a bit shallow, but with some slightly revised dialogue, a couple extra scenes inserted naturally into the narrative, you know, nothing too distracting or dramatic, they ended up feeling far more sympathetic to me. I was surprised to discover that I cared a lot more about those two characters in the remake, and it hit much harder when they inevitably met with terrible fates. It is a horror game after all. With the talent of the writing team at Santa Monica Studio, I would love to see the story of the Greek trilogy expanded in similar ways. just so long as it remains respectful of the original. To be clear, I think the narrative of these games has actually aged very well, particularly the first game. You don't need to change anything. But with that said, I would love to see Lysandra and Calliope, Kratos' wife and daughter, get some more screen time. I would love to see a little more of their relationship, of what Kratos is like as a husband and father, which could ultimately make that one big twist hit a lot harder. The last Spartan in God of War 2 is another character I would be curious to see a bit more of, or Pandora in God of War 3. Her dialogue in that game was a bit chunky. I would love for her to be able to deliver the themes of the game, the importance of finding hope even in the deepest depths of despair, with a little more subtlety. I want the writers to find a way to show the audience that theme, to make us feel it through her character's actions, rather than just straight up tell it to us. And you know me, I'm obsessed with villain characters. I consider Odin and Baldur to be two of the best written villains in any video game ever. They are both violent and sympathetic, both genuinely evil and yet totally compelling. They both feel like they could be redeemed, like there is good in them somewhere, but they refuse to make the better choice. And they have so much personality, they just completely dominate every scene they are in. I think Ares, the Sisters of Fate, Gaia, the Olympians could all be expanded on. Not that any of them are poorly constructed villains as is, or that they need to be changed, just that we could do more. There's a lot of potential here. A lot of the discussion I have seen so far has been focused on sex, blood, and violence. A lot of fans are worried that, for example, the sexual intercourse minigames will be removed in the remake, you dirty, dirty dogs. Or that some of the extreme gratuitous violence will be toned down for a modern audience. Or that there will be less nudity. If you have never played the original trilogy, let me tell you, there are boobies everywhere. Big ol' bouncing tatas on screen constantly. For example, if you are editing a retrospective video to post on YouTube, they are very frustrating to work around. I expect the violence to stay, but that some of it will be moved slightly off screen. For example, in the Chamber of Sacrifice, I would not be surprised if, when the fire begins to burn the innocent man to death, the camera moves away, maybe a close-up on Kratos' face, so we can see his reaction. The focus of the story will be on his character and how the act of committing violence is affecting him and transforming him, rather than just focusing on the violence itself. As for the big violent finishing moves and the gameplay or boss fights, those are probably going to stick around. I don't think those will change. The Norse games have a ton of blood and guts in their combat too, so that doesn't really seem like something Sony or Santa Monica will shy away from. The sexy minigames though, those have to stay, right? They're silly, they're dumb, they contribute very little to the story, but they're a part of the DNA of the original trilogy. It just wouldn't be God of War without them. The remake is still so early in development that I suspect the developers themselves probably haven't answered all of these questions yet. They're probably still figuring out exactly what they want to do. But the fact that Santa Monica will be the ones in charge of the remake and they're bringing Carson back to voice the character gives me a lot of hope. This isn't some alien group of developers coming from off-planet who don't understand God of War. There are a lot of people who worked on the original trilogy who are still a part of Santa Monica's studio. They should know from first-hand experience what made those games great. This is actually a very rare situation. The Crash Bandicoot remakes were not developed by Naughty Dog. Visceral Games, the original developer of Dead Space, is not even around anymore. Team Silent disbanded decades ago. But Santa Monica is still here. They have never developed a bad video game. Even Kinetica was okay. And they do still care about the Greek trilogy. We saw in the Valhalla update that they still consider all of those old plot points to be a canon part of Kratos' journey. They have not retconned or rewritten anything in the Norse games, at least not yet. So this is all speculation, but whatever remake formula they follow, I think it's going to be pretty cool. Though I do suspect it's going to be a long time before we hear anything else about it. And whenever we do, my fat ass will be here to blab about it. In the meantime, I am currently working my way through Sons of Sparta. As someone who's both a huge fan of God of War and Metroidvanias, I assume they made this specifically for me. Just some initial thoughts. So far, I absolutely love how much screen time Deimos is getting. I know a lot of people really love Ghost of Sparta, but Kratos' brother always seemed like a huge wasted opportunity to me. He's a character with a ton of potential, but he just doesn't get enough screen time. Well, his character has been expanded in a huge way in this game, and I really love the way young Kratos has been written here too. He's confident, intelligent, dedicated to the Spartan ideology and to the gods, but inexperienced, not yet respected by his fellow Spartans, somewhat unsure of himself. I think it really works. The gameplay so far seems pretty standard Metroidvania, a big interconnected map, areas looping back on each other, new abilities unlock new secrets in old areas, some straightforward melee combat. I think anyone who enjoys the genre will find a lot to like here. And the pixel art is gorgeous. This one here has been my favorite screen so far. When I'm finished, maybe I'll do a review, maybe I'll do a video on how Kratos and Deimos' characters are being written here. I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. I am also still planning to finish my God of War retrospective series. I assume no one cares anymore since it's been an entire year since I posted my video on God of War 2. But, you know, God of War 3 is probably my personal favorite game in the whole series, and I definitely will do another deep dive soon. I just need to finish some other projects first, and then I will be free to return to God of War. Anyway, see you later.